What is up, harvesters? So today I'm out here on some public land and I wanted to talk to you guys about 3 levels of strategy when you're hunting public land. And that is your beginner strategy, your intermediate strategy, and your advanced strategy. Now, those levels of strategy have nothing to do with your actual experience as a hunter, but they're your experience with that particular piece of public property. So this will be my 25th deer hunting year, but if I'm hunting a piece of public property for the very first time, I'm going to employ a lot more of this beginner strategy than I would an advanced strategy, just because I don't know the property that well. Now, how can you skip over that? Well, if you know somebody, you got a buddy, you got a local guide or something that can tell you some of that information to bump you to one of those more advanced levels right away, by all means do that so that you do skip that beginner phase. But we're going to get it started here. What is that beginner phase? So the beginner phase would be that you want to do some scouting from your couch, from your computer. You want to pull up your phone, look at those topographic maps, look at those changes in terrain that you can see on the maps. Where are your egg fields at? Where are your forests at? Maybe your potential thick areas where you might be able to tell where bedding is from the air. Now, those maps don't get updated all the time, so you're still going to have to do some footwork or at least some windshield time driving through the area to make sure like the DNR didn't clear cut something that was a forest on your map and is now a wide open wasteland until some regeneration can happen there. So, all right, you look at a piece of property. I'm standing here. A lot of them in this area in southeastern Wisconsin are exactly like that. Off this way, we have egg fields towards the road. I'm standing in like a transitional area, which is a lot of just native grasses and oak savannas that the DNR has worked with Pheasants Forever and other upland game bird organizations to get established for things like pheasants or even Ducks Unlimited. There is like a little pond right over here that Ducks Unlimited has been working on, but that all happens in these transitional areas. And then off this way is where our bedding area is, where our woods are, where our thick cover is. So as a very beginner to an area, how do the deer relate to an area like this and how do you hunt them? Well, if you're brand new, my recommendation is to hunt a bedding area. We know that when we're hunting public land, the best thing to do is to get as far away from everybody else as possible. So that means a lot of boot time and getting deep into the woods. Well, how these properties are set up is you have your parking lot, sometimes your hiking trails, your other things are going to be right off of the road, and then you will be able to come through the egg fields, through these transitional areas that I'm standing in right now, and then into your woods. Now, where are those deer going to be bedded? Well, in the thickest part that you can find, but what you're going to want to do is focus on that morning hunt, and that morning hunt is when the deer are out in the egg fields or out in these transitional areas returning to those bedding areas. So you get here an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours before light, depending on what your strategy is for how deep into the woods you're trying to get, and you want to get into those bedding areas. Find those bedding areas, the thickest part of the woods. If you're not that familiar with the property, you can try to look for sign, old scrapes, old rubs, things of that nature, but really you're just looking for stem count and you're looking for a nice place to set up your stand, and you're going to sit there and wait for the deer to return to you. Now, on a property like this, you have a lot of the food and stuff is where all the people are going to be. So, right, you're going to have your people are going to enter those parking lots. You're going to have your upland game bird hunters out in the transitional areas like a field like this. You're going to have your hikers and stuff out there, but those people are not going into the thickest, nastiest part of the woods. And that's where you're going to have your best shot if you know absolutely nothing about the property to set up to hunt for that first hunt. Now, after you're in there, you're going to sit that morning and it's going to get light out and you're going to walk out. And I highly recommend, maybe zigzag your way out. Don't walk out the way you walked in. Check the property out. Maybe you do stumble across a little bit better area of that property. So really, beginner strategy for public hunting is just get as far away from everybody else as you can. I recommend that morning hunt because that's when you're going to be able to go and get into a bedding area, and then the deer will return to you in the morning. The other thing is if you get there, like I was saying, 1, 2, 3 hours before light, all these other hunters and hikers and all of that other human activity that comes to a piece of public property like this is going to drive the deer back to you, because those deer, of course, are going to be heading towards their bedding areas anyway. But if all that additional human activity, you know, the bird hunters, the hikers who are showing up after light, or even those lazier deer hunters that are showing up not as early as you did, are going to be shoving deer toward you, and you're going to have the advantage of them basically pushing deer towards you faster than if you were like on private land and you had to wait in a bedding area for those deer to just slowly make their way back to you. So that's actually an advantage that public land does have. If you put in that boot time, you get in there and you get to that thickest area. So all right, let's move on to what an intermediate strategy is. So if you notice, I did not recommend hunting an afternoon on public land if you're not familiar with it. That doesn't mean you can't do it, but deer are going to be heading towards a food source in the afternoon about an hour or so before dark. So you would want to be set up on a path that leads to that food source or on that food source yourself. Again, depending on bow or gun, you're going to obviously have a different range with each of those weapons, but so with a rifle, you could set up on an entire open food source, but with a bow, you're going to want to be hunting like a very specific trail in a funnel that leads to that. So that intermediate strategy is to definitely look at that topographic map, figure out where your food areas are, figure out where your bedding areas are, figure out where there's a funnel, either topography wise or just cover wise. Maybe there's a fence line or something. Deer won't jump over a fence if they don't have to. They will go through the opening in a fence line. So you can set up in like a pinch point between that bedding area and that food source. And that's what I would recommend as your place to hunt an afternoon. Your morning, you're still going to want to go in and hunt a bedding area, but you'll know more about the property. You'll know better where those bedding areas are, which ones may just be doe bedding and which ones may be more buck bedding. That's something that with more experience on a piece of property, you'll learn that. You'll know where to go based on that. Now, all right, advanced strategy. This gets really tricky because now you need to be patterning the people who use the property just as much as the deer who use the property. And what makes that tricky is like right now, this time of year, we're getting to the end of June. What the deer are doing right now is not what they're going to be doing during the hunting season. So in this transitional area that I'm standing in right now, the edges of it are loaded with deer tracks. They are browsing all of these weeds. This is their food source. I don't even know if they're making it to the egg fields to eat on them at night because they have more than enough in here right now. But all of these weeds are going to deteriorate come fall. Those egg fields are going to be booming just like a food plot would be if you're on private property. But they're going to want to be going into those cornfields, those bean fields, those cereal grain fields, and that's going to be their food source. They're going to just move right through a transitional area that's all weeds right now in the fall. So they're not really going to pay any mind to this. Where they're actually walking like in line with this transitional area right now because they're just browsing through it like a food source. But come fall, they're going to be crossing it and going from bedding area to food source, which is the egg fields here, instead of browsing this way through here. So even if you did come out this time of year and you're like, wow, there's a lot of deer tracks here, there's a nice deer run here that they're using, that's not what they're going to be doing in fall because this native vegetation is going to deteriorate when it gets cold out. Those egg fields are going to be popping ready for harvest, and those deer will start to transition and start focusing on that food source instead. So the way that they move through this transitional area, these native grass areas, is going to completely change that time of year. So what you need to then do, knowing that like these egg fields are near where most of the human activity is, you need to now pattern what humans are coming here. So are they bird hunters? Are they hikers? Whatever, are they other deer hunters? How are those humans coming into this property? That's pretty easy to figure out. They're going to park in the parking lots. The hikers are pretty much going to stay on the trails. The bird hunters are going to stay for the most part in these open grassland areas or wood edges. They're not going to go 100 yards into the woods unless they're trying to retrieve a wounded bird or something. So you can set up based on knowing where those humans are going to be pushing the deer out of. So taking a giant piece of public property, you can really shrink it down and make it easier to understand by knowing that humans are going to be excluding deer from certain areas along those hiking trails, around those parking lots. And you can then look at that piece of property and go, okay, where are my bedding areas? Where are my food sources? but humans have like blown out this whole middle area. So I bet the deer are going to try to loop around here to get into that food source. There's actually a fence line on that edge of the property. I bet I can set up right on that fence line and the deer will walk right underneath me. And for the most part, if you can figure that out on a piece of public property, it will work out for you. So you're just have a little bit more homework because you have to pattern the humans and the deer. But once you know where those humans are, you know where the deer aren't going to be. And it actually makes it a little easier where, like on private land, you're trying to set everything up perfectly and then not disturb the area and then hope the deer just do what you're trying to get them to do. On public land, it's a little bit more like, all right, I think this is what they're going to do because humans are wrecking this area, quote unquote. And I know a lot of public land hunters get annoyed at other humans coming onto public land, but you know, we all own it. It's not any one of ours any more than it is somebody else's. So just use those people to your advantage to actually set up your hunt for you, knowing that the deer won't be in that area. It's going to squeeze them into a smaller area that actually will help you if you do that correctly. Now you do kind of have to pattern those other deer hunters too. You know, they're maybe listening to this video too, and they're going to do that same thing. So you kind of got to look at your own pockets and figure out where you're going to go. The other thing you got to know is I know most hunters are old. They're not going to want to go in, or they're not in as good a shape. They're not going to want to go in 3 miles off the road, shoot a deer, and then have to somehow drag it out of there. So they are going to just go sit on that first wood line and maybe just enjoy their time in the woods, even if it isn't their highest percentage chance of harvesting a deer on public land. So you don't have every hunter going into those honey holes on a piece of public property, but just know that, like, if you can figure out what the other hunters, the other deer hunters, the bird hunters, the hikers, the bird watchers, whoever else is using public land during that time of year, even the fishermen, some of these properties have places where you can go fishing. Well, you obviously know that fisherman's going to water, right? He's not carrying a fishing pole to go sit in the middle of a field somewhere. So it's easy to predict where a lot of these humans are going, and then know that if these are the type of people that are using that particular piece of public property, you then know where the deer aren't. So start looking then, you know, deer are still going to move between their bedding areas and their food sources. They still have to eat multiple times every day. They will figure out a way to get to that food by avoiding those people. That's where you need to set up. But like I said, that's a very advanced strategy for a piece of public land because you need to have observed that piece of public land or done a really good job of scouting from maps and such to know how are people using this property, how are the deer moving, where are my actual bedding areas, not just where it looks like one might be on a map, where are my actual food sources. You know, where I'm standing right here, they have beans planted here, they have a cereal grain planted here, and then over across the road that way they have corn planted. So the deer could be focusing on the corn for a certain time of the year, but then that the beans are their favorite food source, and then that cereal grain's what they're feeding on. So they can switch their movement based on which of the food sources they're relating to as well. And then maybe one of their bedding areas did get blown out. Maybe somebody did hunt it and was in there making a mess. Maybe they were successful and harvested an animal, but you know, in game retrieval blew the area out. So now they're using a different bedding area. So just always think when you're on public land that don't pick your favorite spot and always hunt that spot. Like you should always think that the grass is greener on the other side of the fence when hunting public land, because it really is, because it's constantly changing. The deer movement's changing just naturally based on available food sources and whatever pressure they're getting at that time of year too, because things like different bird seasons only last for a part of the deer season. Like dove opens before deer season does here in Wisconsin. So those hunters are out here kind of getting first grab at the land. But then you have your pheasant hunters, your duck hunters, they're going to be out here too. The goose hunters might have permission from the farmer next to the public land to hunt in their field for goose. So now you have that sort of human activity that you maybe weren't planning on. So there's just a lot of transitional type things that can be happening, and you just always want to be proactively changing to adjust for it. And that's how you will find success on public land. So if you guys feel like you got some value out of this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.